Welcome to advocacy training number 2 for those that are coming online, because this is going to be online. I'm Nate McGaha, Executive Director of Arts North Carolina. That is exactly how you spell my name. I do not know why it is pronounced that way. If you have a child at home that has some free time to do research, I would love to have an explanation. We are going to be talking about advocacy training, particularly updated a little bit to inform how we might change our advocacy methodology as we are dealing with the pandemic and the COVID-19 spread throughout the country. I am going to talk a little bit about Arts North Carolina, because I know a lot of folks on this webinar and a lot of folks out there might be coming new to arts advocacy. So I want you to understand who we are and what we do. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how to have these conversations, as well as some tools that we have at the General Assembly. And then once we move into that, we'll talk about how those conversations might play into the larger picture of advocacy methodology. So Arts North Carolina is a 501c3 nonprofit arts advocacy organization with a mission of uniting people and communities to strengthen and celebrate a creative North Carolina, and a vision of a vibrant North Carolina where the arts are embraced by all as indispensable. You could read that 10 times and still not know exactly what we focus on. So primarily we focus on public funding and policy for nonprofit arts organization. We also focus on promoting public funding and policy for comprehensive arts education. I'm going to explain both of those here in a minute, exactly what we mean by that. So, you know, kind of advocacy and lobbying working together, understanding those terms. Advocacy is about a broader thing, right? Like funding arts in schools is a really good thing and makes kids smarter and more successful. Lobbying is more specific. I would like you to put $10 million, please, into funding for arts in our schools. So that's the difference between advocacy and lobbying. They both need to be strategic and intentional. You need both, and they need to work together. So how do we do that? One of our key pillars is grassroots, right? Grassroots advocacy is really about connecting people and citizens to their elected officials. We help with that. We hold events and seminars and education to facilitate that. We encourage people to do that. We help through our Arts NC email list. We help define that message so that we can all be like a choir singing the same voice. We've got a network of hundreds of organizations across the state, as well as thousands of individuals that participate in that advocacy. We also employ a professional lobbyist to work at the North Carolina General Assembly on our behalf all year, Ken Melton and Associates. In addition to Ken, there's Andy Chase and Stephen Kuba. Stephen Kuba is the guy that actually is kind of the primary lobbyist on our account. If you're over at the North Carolina General Assembly, you see a really tall guy with glasses and a bow tie. That's our guy, Stephen. So anyway, we're really glad to have them talking on the arts and arts education issues all year long. So election engagement, we send out candidate surveys to the North Carolina General Assembly. I was planning to expand that to some statewide offices this year. I'm not sure whether or not we're going to be able to expand the candidate surveys. We're a little busy. We also provide voter resources, and we're going to talk a little bit more later about some election engagement that you can do. This is an election year. I know we're really focused on the crisis right now, but this is an election year, and we are going to be voting people into office that are going to be dealing with the outcomes of this crisis for years to come. So talking about election engagement and what Arts North Carolina is doing is going to be crucial. So kind of, I want to give a little primer on public funding and policy for nonprofits and what a big chunk of our work on this front is. So Arts North Carolina is the advocacy organization. We advocate to the North Carolina General Assembly primarily so that they will allocate grant dollars or dollars to be granted out by the North Carolina Arts Council. Right now that stands at about 6.3 recurring, though we've seen some growth in non-recurring funds as well. North Carolina Arts Council distributes that grant out to all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina. There is not a single county that is not getting funded in some way, shape, or form by the North Carolina Arts Council. In addition, Arts North Carolina works with our national partner, Americans for the Arts. together, we have that conversation with Congress. And, you know, that from the first part of the webinar, this was something that we're going to be doing a lot in the coming weeks and months. We are specifically asking for dollars and allocations to go to the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the National Endowment for the Humanities, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and other arts-friendly and arts-focused organizations. So in addition to that 6.3 in grants, plus about $1 million in operating from the state, National Endowment for the Arts provides about $1 million each year, just shy of $1 million, to the North Carolina Arts Council, that then also gets distributed in grants all across the state of North Carolina. In addition to those grants, the NEA is right now giving grants between $600,000 and $1 million, depending on the year, directly to organizations across the state. It's very possible that you work for an organization that is already getting an NEA grant. What does this structure look like as it relates to the pandemic and COVID-19? This is the exact same flow chart that you are going to see working for us when we are talking about federal funding to mitigate the damage that is coming our way. It is going to be Arts North Carolina working with Americans for the Arts through state and federal legislature to get money to our arts councils that are going to distribute money to you through the NEA and the North Carolina Arts Council. In terms of public funding and policy for comprehensive arts education, I'm not going to talk much about this. Just know that everything we do is based on this three-tiered approach to arts education. One is arts education, which is just what you think it is: learning how to draw, learning how to sing, learning how to sculpt, act, dance, creative writing, all of those things, actually teaching an art form. Arts exposure, that is an essential part of a comprehensive arts education, such as going to a museum, hearing a symphony concert, seeing a dance performance, seeing a play. All of those things are really important to the overall arts education. And finally, arts integration, which is using the arts as a catalyst for learning across the entire curriculum. When I'm explaining this to legislators, I tell them that, look, you learned your alphabet to a song by Mozart. There is no reason that you cannot learn your solar system by doing a dance in the gym, and so on and so on and so on. And it actually works and has some really great outcomes. As part of this whole process, we've been working hard for a graduation requirement in the state of North Carolina. We are incredibly close. If you want to learn more, please check us out. Check that out at the education portion of our website. I do want to talk about something that we launched just a little over a year ago, officially in both chambers, which was the Joint Caucus on the Arts and Arts Education. This is a club, basically a gathering point for members of the North Carolina General Assembly so that they can come together and learn more about the economic, educational, and civic impact of the arts in the state of North Carolina, right? So that information, that gathering really gives us sort of a place that we can convene and have one conversation with a large group of legislators on a relatively regular basis as we build it. Caucus leadership, and these are the folks that we are going to be looking to specifically to sort of lead the Arts Caucus so that we can have these conversations about COVID-19 impact as we move through this crisis. You've got Representative Becky Carney out of Mecklenburg. She has been an arts champion for well over a decade at the General Assembly and on the Mecklenburg County Commission before that. Her Republican co-chair in the House is Jeffrey Elmore. He is an art teacher out of Wilkes County, a huge supporter of the arts, massive supporter of arts education, and has done a lot of work trying to help arts teachers within the state budget, and we work with him on that as well. Senator Deanna Ballard, she has worked for Samaritan Purse, so she has a nonprofit background. She has an A+ school in her district. She is a big supporter of the arts and what we're trying to do. She is the Republican chair, and then her co-chair is Senator Mike Woodard out of Durham County, I think person as well. He has sat and chaired the Durham Arts Council Board before. He has an understanding of how arts councils work, its connection to the North Carolina Arts Council. So really, these are four legislators that that came together and with the help of Arts North Carolina formed this caucus. And we're looking to them for leadership in this difficult time. Now that caucus right now sits at 63 members, 43 in the House and 20 in the Senate. You can see that's 35 to 40% of both of those chambers. So that's really huge, and we're glad to see, really in our first year, to see well over a third of the General Assembly represented in the caucus. You can also see that it is there are more Republicans than Democrats in the House, and it's a 50-50 split in the Senate. In your communications, you can check it on our website to see whether or not your representatives are members of the caucus. If they are not, please encourage them to join. All they have to do is reach out to the offices of one of those 4 chairs that we talked about earlier and say, I want to be a member of the Arts Caucus. And that is really is simply all it is, legislative assistant to legislative assistant. There's no paperwork. There's nothing fancy. And they are not committing to vote a certain way or do anything. They're just committing to be a part of something and learn. Obviously, our goals for the caucus right now, first and foremost, and for the foreseeable future, is going to be leadership on the arts COVID-19 response and what we're doing that in arts and arts education and what that means. And at some point, we're going to be diving into arts education as well and what the impacts there. Certainly, we want to educate them about the programs and grants of the North Carolina Arts Council and the effect that has across the state, the economic impact not only of the nonprofit art sector, but the entire nonprofit and for-profit creative industries together, and having that conversation with them about arts education. So that's what we do with the Joint Caucus on Arts and Arts Education. This is typically the portion of the program where I talk about Arts Day and how you need to come to Arts Day and how amazing Arts Day is and how there's a day as a conference and a day where we talk to legislators. And I'm not going to get into that conversation right now. We may have to cancel it. We may have to postpone it. We may have to turn it into an online thing with webinars and phone conversations and video conferences with legislators. We're looking into that. I'm having those conversations tomorrow and moving on to figure out what we're going to do. We're going to continue to monitor the situation and whatever recommendations are coming from public health officials. We might have Arts Day and still have the General Assembly closed to visits, or they might not even be in session at all. So this is obviously a very fluid situation. For those of you concerned about Arts Day, we are looking into it. We don't know is really what it boils down to. The reality is that Arts Day or not, our advocacy is so crucial in this moment that don't wait for Arts Day, right? It's time to go online, figure out what you can do at artsnc.org and start having these conversations. There's no longer a day in May where we're going to have this conversation. This is about making this happen now, about the needs now, and starting the conversation right now. As you start that conversation, if you are only looking at the Part 2 webinar, I do encourage you to check out the Part 1 webinar to look at how to have those conversations. Talking a little bit about advocacy methodology. What are the different parts that we use? What are the tools in our toolbox? Grassroots advocacy, and for the purpose of going through this, that's your emails, your letters, your phone calls, right? Like lots of people, like the calls to action we did later in the earlier last week. Contact your legislator, have that conversation via email, put your thoughts down, maybe send a letter, maybe do a phone call. So that's really your lower level grassroots advocacy. You do that through alliances. So sign up for Arts NC in our email list, sign up for the Americans for the Arts email list, North Carolina Center for Nonprofit. I can't stress enough. We're sending out information, we're sending out calls to action. Stay on top of that for your grassroots advocacy. Relationship building, otherwise known by some as grass tops advocacy. Meetings with decision makers is really the way to make things happen. In this new reality that we're dealing with, you can do it by phone, you can do it by video, right? Face-to-face is great, but so video is going to be great, but this is kind of the new video conference reality that we're living in. Certainly, I like to promote Arts Day and the National Arts Action Summit. I know that there's conversation about the Action Summit being online at the end of the month, and we'll have that conversation about Arts Day. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's about sharing your story, educating and explaining, and then asking for the arts. And we'll talk more about that, I think, in the next slide. And remembering to be nonpartisan at all times, positive at all times, and always, always have an attitude of gratitude. And public awareness. Now, this is sort of where we go out of the box that we live in, beyond that conversation with just our legislator, and try and get the larger population aware of our issues. Certainly, social media, getting people on email lists. This is the way that we do this most often. Celebrations and events, that's great. Kind of like Arts Day, but we don't know when that's going to be possible again. So for now, we're just keeping digital, reaching out to print and online publications. We're going to get into that a little bit more later on, but that certainly is a piece of that. Generally speaking, marches and protests, I do not recommend for the arts. You don't need to be screaming out in front of the governor's mansion. There are issues where that's appropriate, but in general for the arts, we are not marching and protesting. We are simply gathering and celebrating. When you start moving from just having a conversation with a legislature to going into a public awareness part of your advocacy, please exercise caution. Public awareness is a great way to make friends. It's also a really easy way to make enemies. So you want to keep that message positive and advancing your cause and not degrading somebody else's. So always be really careful how we approach what we're sending out on the internet. So this is how we're going to think about having these conversations with legislators, right? Share your story, educate and explain, and then making an ask for the arts, right? So the example I use on this is, so when you think about a legislator, you've seen a congressman or congresswoman talking about a new bill that they're introducing that they think is going to do something really great. And they'll always start talking about it by telling you some really emotional or impactful story about a problem or the issue, and then how this legislation is going to solve it, right? We're going to take that back. This is exactly how you make this. Stories stick. Stories help people envision the issue, right? So we're going to talk about, let's say, for instance, little Johnny, right? We're going to talk about how little Johnny came from a difficult background, had all the cards stacked against him, always struggled in school, had anger issues, whatever that is. Little Johnny was up against a wall. Little Johnny started a music class or an art class, and little Johnny started to thrive. He started to want to come to school. You could see in his face that little Johnny was starting to do better, and his grades were showing that. Little Johnny got through high school, and little Johnny actually got into college and did very well. And that we know that happened to little Johnny because of his involvement in the arts. And the legislator's going to be like, that's great for little Johnny, but why would I fund this just for little Johnny? And the thing is that you tell them that little Johnny is every Johnny and every Jane, because we know that because kids that are actively involved in the arts are 5 times more likely to graduate from high school and twice as likely to graduate from college, especially if they're in that low socioeconomic income bracket and facing the most challenges, right? So now we've taken that one person and we've expanded it out to all the constituencies and the larger problem. And that's how you use that impactful story to take the data and make it apply. And it's really just about finding the story and the data point that work together in order to make your case. And then when you're having these conversations, always make an ask for the arts, even if it's just, can I follow up with you later? Can I send you more information? Can we make a meeting for a few months, right? But certainly, usually you're going to be like, can you please allocate $4 billion to the National Endowment for the Arts, or whatever that particular ask in that particular moment is. I often like to say that sometimes when I'm leaving a legislator's office, I will ask if there is anything I can do for them. It really throws them because nobody actually asks legislators if they need anything. I've gotten one response, which was to let everybody know that Republicans do not oppose arts funding as a general rule, and that we needed to approach this in a bipartisan and actually nonpartisan way. She was a huge art supporter. And that's why I tell that story, is because that is a reality, and you don't know whether or not somebody is for or against your issue until you have the conversation, not just based on what party they are or whether or not you voted for them. So how do we remember this? No number without a story, no story without a number. We always want to be able to tell that story, but have that number to connect it, etc. Don't go in and just dump a bunch of data onto a legislator's desk or at him over Skype or Zoom or whatever platform we're working on now. Here's some facts, certainly, that there's 72,000 full-time jobs in a $2.12 billion economy supported just by the nonprofit industry. Creative industries in North Carolina, that's for-profit and nonprofit, 417,000 full-time equivalent jobs, $29 billion of economic impact, with 10 billion of that in exports. One out of every 3 people at an arts event in this state are from outside the county where the event's being held. And the ones that are coming from outside the county are spending twice as much money over and above the cost of admission. If you want to get your county and city government to focus on something, this is a piece of information they should have. I already talked about students with high participation in the arts and their dropout rates versus their and college graduations. Also know that students involved in the arts are 4 times more likely. There is a lot of information like that. You can find connections to it on our website or at Americans for the Arts website. So using that data to back up your story. Those are just a few examples. So when you're taking the meetings with elected officials, first thing you got to do is schedule the meeting. You know, whether or not that's via phone call or email, it's just like setting a meeting for anybody else. You do need to make sure that you're asking the right person for the right thing. Obviously, if you're asking for county money, you want to talk to a county commissioner. And if you're asking for state money, you know, a state legislator. But you know, certainly with more difficult policies, you might have to dig a little bit to figure out exactly who you need to be having that conversation with. When to meet, there's no wrong time to meet, but be strategic. This is normally where I tell people that they need to think about having a conversation with their legislature over coffee, and that a really good time in non-election years is with a pumpkin spice latte, because the fall is when the budget processes at all levels of government happen in the spring. But this, so having the conversation in the fall and then reminding them of that conversation in the spring is a really great idea. Having both of those conversations. So when everybody's trying to talk to them, you're just reminding them about the hour you had over coffee. In non-election or in election years, they're a little busy up until November. So wait for the peppermint spice lattes to come out. But the reality is that because of COVID-19, now is the time. And I really can't stress that enough. It is time to be having these conversations right now. How to schedule, like I said, it's just like scheduling any other appointment, but legislative offices are incredibly understaffed. And so they don't have a ton of resources. They are very busy. So be patient, be persistent, stay positive, be polite. You want to have a good relationship with your legislator's legislative assistant, but you want to continue to have that conversation. You do have to be persistent. Might need to call to every few days or every week, maybe email one week and call the next. Taking the meeting, we already talked about what that needs to be, sharing, educating, and asking, and to make sure that you are inclusive in the way that you have the conversation. Talk about how the arts are impacting all the communities within your area, and to continue to be nonpartisan about it. Stay positive. You know, you might end up in a situation where you have to agree to disagree with a legislator. Don't get angry. You know, not everybody agrees, right? But the more people that come and tell a legislator an opinion that he doesn't believe in, the more he's going to realize that it might be something that he needs to listen to. So it's okay to agree to disagree. Just trying to always stay positive as you're having these conversations. Thanking the official, thanking the official, thanking the official. You've got to have the attitude of gratitude. This is thankless work. A lot of times people want from government. They don't take the time to say thank you. Best way to do it, handwritten note, just like your grandmother taught you. It comes on the desk. It's going to sit there for a while. It's going to be appreciated when they open it up. Could hang out for a while. If you're thanking a lot of legislators, everybody likes mail, right? So if you got to print a bunch of letters off, that's fine. Print those letters off. At least it's something physical. It might be on the desk for a few seconds before it gets recycled, but it's going to have some kind of physical impact with that legislator, that a piece of mail came to them and to thank them for their time and for their service. Email is better than nothing. We all know how easily emails get clicked without getting read or without getting that impact. However, I will say emails are a really great way to follow up from conversations with additional information, so that you can provide links to some of that data that you may have provided so that they can follow up more easily. But it's a good follow-up to the handwritten note as well to send that email. And then continue building out that relationship. You want to stay in touch. Keep inviting them to shows. Keep inviting them to your programming. As soon as we have programming again, they may not come, but every time you invite them, it's a nice thing to do, and it's reminding them that you're doing things in the community. So don't stop just because they don't respond. Really, this is building a relationship. You treat someone like a friend, eventually they're going to become one. And that's exactly how you build this relationship. Make sure you're staying up on your issues. Legislator, when you build that relationship, they're going to use you as a go-to. They're going to be like, hey, there's something about arts funding. Let me call Bob the advocate and see what he knows about this. So stay up to date. Also, know what's important to them, right? Like, check out their campaign site. Great way to find out what folks are really all about is to look at the website they use to get the job. And a lot of those will keep their websites active even after the election is over. If they ran on a transportation platform, might not be a bad idea to understand transportation as you have your conversation. But just always, always, always be grateful. It is thankless, unforgiving work. And contrary to popular belief, elected officials are not getting crazy rich. Maybe a few, but they're not getting crazy rich off being in government. So that's all I've got to say about meetings with elected officials. In terms about making your message known, there's a lot of things that you can do, particularly while we're all cooped up in our house. Write op-eds. It is a really great way. I mean, keep it relatively short and compact, a few hundred words. A lot of papers will have online submission forms, and they'll ask you for a certain amount of characters or words for letters to the editor, and some take op-eds as well. Write it, submit it, frame your case, tell that story, link it to a number, put it down in writing, send it off to the paper. If they don't print it, who cares? You've got your Facebook account. You've got, go ahead, put it on the Facebook, put it out there. Lord knows that we have seen enough lengthy Facebook rants that putting some good information out there about the arts is a great way to get your message out there. Recognize public funding when you are recognizing sponsors. Certainly, we hope that we are recognizing sponsors for performances and showings and openings and things in the near future, but making sure that we are always incorporating public funding into all of our messaging. Curtain speeches when we get to have that again. If you're getting interviewed, talk about not only relief funding, but the funding that's been coming to your organization for years. Your own materials need to represent the public funding. Make that part of the conversation that you're having with your audience at large, so that they understand that government is helping you, and then they're going to help you talk to government about it. Schedule time at government meetings. This is another great way to, there's lots of public hearings. Take those opportunities to come and have a conversation with local government. You can make comparisons to other communities if you want to do some goal setting, telling those stories, providing that data, and notify the press that you're going to be there, so that maybe those interactions can get picked up and put out. Holding events to call attention to your message when we can have those events again is certainly another really great way. Not a protest, not a march, but like, let's have a celebration of arts education and use that as a way to promote awareness around it. I'm not going to go too much into advocacy campaigns, other than to say, just kind of step through, right? You got to figure out what the problem is, and you got to set some goals to deal with it. That's what, if you're doing this in your own community, campaigns are usually great if they're led by the Arts Council, because they kind of have that view of the entire arts community. Setting the goals and then working to achieve them, figuring out who the decision makers are, also figuring out who the influencers are, who's their friend, who are they married to, who contributes to their campaign, which, by the way, you can look people up to see who they give money to on the North Carolina State Board of Elections website. Get together with your group, with your planning group, with your team, create a strategy of using your advocacy methods. How are you going to go about it? Taking inventory of your tools, people and connections. Who do you know that knows the people that are going to make the decision? Making those connections can be key in launching an advocacy campaign. Certainly, figuring out your communication, who's sending emails, who's talking to who. You don't want to have, you got 7 people on a city council and your entire advocacy campaign talks to 2 of them, you're not going to pass your vote. So you gotta deal with that. And do you need any money? When you go to execute the campaign, the last thing I'll say about this is make sure somebody is in charge, or at the very least directing traffic, mainly so that you don't end up talking to only 2 people out of 7 on a county commission or city council. But really, it helps to coordinate everything and make sure that somebody's playing traffic cop and keeping everything coordinated. Talk a little bit about election engagement. As nonprofits, please be aware of the rules. You can find information about that on the artsnc.org website, as well as the North Carolina State Board of Elections website as well. Voter registration. This is a push that we were talking about. Obviously, it's going to be a while. Hopefully, we will be having performances and exhibits and events before the next election, inviting organizations like League of Women Voters and others to come into your lobby or to come to your event and do voter registration. And not only brings in new registrations, it reminds people to update their registration if they moved. It shows that you're a good citizen of the community, and it also allows people to make that connection between public funding, government, and the arts in their head. Candidate surveys. Make sure that if you're going to solicit candidate surveys, you have to do all candidates. That goes for everything a nonprofit does. You can't treat candidates differently. Those surveys should have some information and context, give them some of those great talking points. The nonprofit arts in this state provides 72,000 full-time jobs and $2.12 billion in economic impact. Do you think that's something the North Carolina General Assembly should fund? Simple yes or no question. They'll give you a yes or no, and then there's a space for comments. So that's how you can put together those candidate surveys. Usually for local election, it's good to have the local arts council play the lead on that. Also going to different town halls and candidate forums that are already happening for all the different races. Might want to know a little bit about the candidates that are running, but you want to frame that question much like you would in the candidate survey. Give a little bit of context, a little bit of background of what you're asking for. Ask a very direct question that could be answered with a yes or no, though you might not get a yes or no, and then be prepared with a follow-up. I know that League of Women Voters does a lot of those types of forums. If a lot of people are submitting to ask the same question, that helps to make sure that question gets asked, even if you're not the one asking it, there might be a moderator. And finally, this is something that we were looking to do a big push in this year, but really in years moving forward as well, as candidate events. Every year is election year. If you're not voting for county and state and federal, then you are voting for city, and each one of these elections count. Many, if not most, municipal elections in this state city elections happen in the odd number years. So every year is an election year with a chance to engage candidates. You want to, if you're going to hold a forum or a town hall or a meet and greet, whatever that is, you want to do it specifically for the arts. Ever since 2016, these events, everybody and their brother is having one, or sister is having one, and they're all picking a wide variety of topics. If you want to add to that communication with all these candidate forums, do it. Start having that conversation solely about the arts. Like I said, you got to invite every single candidate. Arts North Carolina in the coming months is going to be working on putting together a toolkit. I want to give a huge shout out to Raleigh, who in the city elections last year in October, group of Raleigh arts leaders got together and held like a meet and greet for everybody running for city council and mayor. Had fantastic turnout. I think it was 15 different candidates for all those offices came out in a room full of arts leaders and artists, and just had a conversation about the arts. The candidates just introduced themselves. The rest was just a mixer. It was art, some wine, some cheese, and those events that we all know very well. Also, Wilmington, this heading into Super Tuesday, held a forum for everybody that was running for for county commission, right? So out of 15 candidates running for 3 county commission slots, 13 of them were able to make it. It's really effective, but when you're doing partisan races, you want to do that before the primary because they all are hungry to get their message out before the primary. There was a great structure for what they did. They provided some context about the Arts Council and the work that they did and the economic impact in the community. Nice 20-minute presentation, some prepared questions. Everybody got a chance to answer, and then they took questions from the audience. And the event went really well and raised some really exciting issues, not just about arts funding, but about facilities in New Hanover County. So we want to start working, Arts North Carolina wants to help get more of these events happening in the future. So we're going to be engaging at the local level that way. Real quick, this is how I end all my advocacy presentations. Are you up for the arts, right? So let's just kind of run down. Certainly, are you signed up for the email list? I cannot stress this enough in this particularly difficult time. We have to be able to communicate with you. So please sign up for the email list. That's how we're going to give you information and calls to action. Join up. Yes, we are a nonprofit organization. Organizations can join. The membership rates on a sliding scale. Individuals, I'm not going to push asking you for money. I will say you can get the Creative State plate at thecreativestate.org. It's $30 a year to have one. $20 comes to Arts North Carolina. This is how we pay for the professional lobbyists. This is how we have that voice at the North Carolina General Assembly all year long, right? So this is a very important piece of revenue for us. And also speak up. This is the most important thing you can do. And honestly, if you don't do anything else on this slide, please speak up for the arts. Answer those calls to action. Find out what's going on. Talk about the arts in your community with your leaders. Meet with those elected officials remotely now, admittedly. Show up to Arts Day, May 19th and 20th, to be determined. I will let you know. But that's all I've got. So if there's any questions, I will open it up for that right now.
I don't see any questions in the chat box. If we don't have that many people on anymore, so if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. Well, it sounds like you were very thorough. Oh, wait.
All right, fantastic.
Nope,
well,
no questions.
I will
okay.
end this with, if I've still got anybody on, my favorite Aaron Sorkin quote, which is, decisions are made by those who show up. So get out there and show up for the arts, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in and have a fantastic day.